Welcome to the pre-calculus notes for using trig. We're on chapter 4.3. Make sure you put your name and what period you're in. So if you hopefully remember your SOHCAHTOA, your trig ratios of opposite over hypotenuse is sine, adjacent over hypotenuse is cosine, and opposite over adjacent is tangent, but it helps to write these sometimes in your notes and on your assignment. All right, so we're going to be solving using some trig. So you're going to want either your scientific calculator, or if you don't have your own, go ahead and open a tab for Desmo's scientific calculator. So the first one we're looking at this angle right here that is labeled 58 degrees. Technically, this one is 90, but you can't use 90. You can either use the 58 or you can calculate what this one is over here. But it's just easiest to start with the one that they give you. So from here, you know this side, which is 35, that's opposite. And the side you want to solve for is this side right here, labeled X, and it is the adjacent. So opposite and adjacent is your tangent ratio. So we're going to say the tangent of 58, because that's how many degrees are right there, is equal to the opposite of 35 over the adjacent X. And then you're going to solve by taking the 35 and dividing it by the tangent of 58. You want to make sure that your calculator is in degree mode. If it's in another mode, you're going to get a weird answer. And then go ahead and round to 2 decimal places and you'll get 21.87 units. So this side over here, 21.87, yeah, that makes sense. Okay? All right, over here we've got angle of 27 degrees. The y next to it is adjacent, and this is obviously the hypotenuse because it's opposite the right angle. So that is going to be our cosine. The cosine of 27 is going to be equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. You're going to set it up as a proportion, do the cross product, and solve. So in your calculator, you're just going to type 55 times the cosine of 27 and hit the equal sign. You should get 49.01. All right, so now instead of solving for missing sides, we're going to solve for missing angles. Okay, so you're going to use usually Greek alphabet letters, like this one's the theta. This one over here is called phi. So for theta right here, we know these two sides. So this is the adjacent and this is the hypotenuse. So we're going to use cosine, but since we're solving for the angle, we're going to use the inverse. So on your calculator, you're either going to need to hit shift or second, and then the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Make sure you close those parentheses on your calculator, hit the equal sign, and you're going to get 64.85 degrees for this angle. If it says to round to the nearest whole number, you would get 65 degrees, okay? Just depending on the wording of the question. All right, for the second one over here, for angle phi, we've got opposite and adjacent, so the tangent. Since we're solving for the angle, we're going to use the inverse, and the ratio will be the 75 to the 58. Again, make sure your calculator is in degree mode, and you should get 52.28. If it wants to the nearest whole number, it's just going to be 52, because after the decimal is a 2. All right, so for this one here on the left, where we've got two variables to solve for. We've got x and we've got y. All right, looks like I solved for y first. So the y is right here, and it's part of this triangle that has the, well, it's actually part of both triangles because it's in both triangles. 58 degrees, and this side is the adjacent, and the 14 is the hypotenuse. So adjacent and a hypotenuse is the cosine. So we're going to say the cosine of 58 degrees is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Do the cross product and solve. And so we get y is equal to 7.42. Now let's solve for x. Okay, so x is over here. Once you've solved for that 7.42 side, you're going to use that as your adjacent for the next setup to solve for this x over here, which is the hypotenuse. So we've got adjacent hypotenuse, which is another cosine. So the cosine of 40 is the adjacent, which we just calculated, 7.42 over the hypotenuse. Set up your proportion, do the cross product, and you get a side of 9.69. Okay. All right, for this one on the right, we have two variables again. So in order to solve for x, we actually have to solve for y first. So we're going to use the 24 degrees. So we're going to have this side, which is adjacent, this side, which is hypotenuse. So cosine of 24 is equal to the adjacent y over the hypotenuse 43. Do the cross product and then solve, so you get 39.28. That's the measurement of this altitude right here. And then to solve for x, we're going to use the 32 and the adjacent and the opposite. So opposite and adjacent is tangent this time. So tangent of 32, opposite over adjacent, cross product, multiply. All right, let's look at one that's a word problem. It says, from a 70-foot observation tower on the coast, a Coast Guard officer sights a boat in difficulty. The angle of depression of the boat is 10 degrees. How far is the boat from the coast? Okay, so if the angle of depression is 10 degrees, then that means this angle inside the triangle is 80, because that should form a right angle of 90 degrees. So 90 minus 10 is 80. Okay, and that tower is 70 feet high, so go ahead and label it. We want to know what is that flat distance right there, so that's what we're going to label x. Okay, so from this 80 degrees, we've got opposite, the side we want to solve, and adjacent, the side that we know. So we're going to use tangent of 80 equals x over 70. We're going to do the cross product after setting up the proportion. Punch it in your calculator. You should get 397 feet. All right, an airplane is flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet. The angle of elevation from an observer on the ground is 40 degrees. What is the distance between the observer and the plane? So that's going to be the hypotenuse, right? So we're going to label that hypotenuse x, and we know from the ground that airplane is at 30,000 feet. Okay, so we got from the 40 degrees down here where the person's at on the ground is opposite and hypotenuse. So we're going to use the sine of 40. Opposite over hypotenuse, do the cross product. You should get roughly 46,671.2 feet. And generally speaking, when you, if they ask you to round to the nearest hundreds, then you would round it up. Okay. Have a great day, guys.